think we can give it a start. There are still some people joining, but I think we can go ahead. I would like to welcome everyone to this EPC Online Policy Dialogue titled The Israel-Hamas War, Local and Regional Paths Towards De-escalation. My name is Mihai Chihaia. I'm a policy analyst here at the European Policy Center, and I'll have the pleasure to moderate this, this discussion. We've seen since October 7, the Middle East has changed dramatically. We're witnessing violence escalating constantly. We also see regional reverberations. I think besides the Israel-Hamas war, of course, there are other regional escalations. We see Iranian-backed groups that have increased their attacks on the U.S. forces in Iraq, in Syria. We see the Houthis attacking shipping routes in the Red Sea. So the effects are far-reaching and go just beyond the region. We see effects on international trade, supply chain, and so on. Of course, the US has been carrying out some retaliatory strikes on Iran-backed militias across Syria and Iraq. We've seen most recently, I think yesterday, a drone strike in Baghdad. And then, of course, on the other hand, in the Red Sea, we've seen the US and the UK attack strikes supported by allies aimed at reducing Houthis' capabilities. Then we also seen the EU reacting to the developments. Most recently, they are planning a maritime mission in the Red Sea. But maybe just to go back to the topic of our online dialogue today, which is de-escalation. It's important to also look at the ceasefire negotiations, and we've seen developments that have been unfolding very quickly in the past days. Well, to discuss all these issues, we have an excellent panel today with us, and I would like to welcome you all. I'm just going to quickly introduce you, and then we'll just go straight into discussion. We have today with us Aaron Miller, a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. We have Maya Sion, who's the director of the Israel-Europe Relations Program at Mitvim. Then we have Andrea Dessì, assistant professor, American University of Rome, and scientific advisor at Istituto Affari Internazionali. And last but not least, we have Adnan Tabatabai, who is the CEO of Center for Applied Research in partnership with Orient, shortly CARPO. Now, a few housekeeping rules. I'll give the floor to the speakers for a couple of introductory remarks, and then we'll go straight into the discussion. If you have any questions, feel free to write them in the chat. I'll read them out loud, and then we can see who is best placed to address them. I would encourage you to start with your questions early. I know Aaron can stay with us for about 45 minutes, and thank you very much for making this possible. And then we'll continue the discussion until 15 minutes past 4 Brussels time. And then I think without further ado, we'll go to you, Aaron, just to ask you, maybe you could give us an overview of the US reactions to the war in Gaza. And maybe you can also touch upon the recent developments in the ceasefire negotiations. And the floor is yours.
Sure.
Please go ahead.
And thanks for having me. Let me just start with a basic observation, which I think is too often ignored, although it's obvious to the point of being extraordinarily obvious. The trajectory of this conflict has been set and will remain the purview of the two major combatants. And I think that fact is sometimes lost amidst efforts on the part of well-intentioned external parties, including the United States and the Biden administration, to affect the calculus of both parties. I think right now, frankly, that Israel and Hamas's clocks are better synced with one another than the administration's clock. I think Israel, the current prime minister, is not prepared to make the kinds of concessions that would lead to a quick and comprehensive de-escalation, cessation of hostilities. I think Hamas continues to believe that it can get more by deploying the 2 or 3 assets that seems to have it's played to its advantage. Number one, the tunnel infrastructure, The second, the negotiations over hostages, which is critically important. And the third is time. Yesterday began the 5th month of this war. And to say the least, Israeli military objectives, despite the fact that they have been considerable in terms of eliminating Hamas fighters and destroying military command and control and infrastructure, has yet to identify and kill the senior leadership or create a situation where Hamas as an organization, political and or military organization, is somehow on the verge of extinction. I think it's a fair question to ask right now that if the war came to an end tomorrow or a month from now, whether or not Hamas's sovereignty in Gaza, its capacity to affect the politics and economy of Gaza has been fundamentally eroded. The Biden administration, on the other hand, is in a hurry. It's in a hurry for several reasons. Number one, the exponential rise in Palestinian deaths and the humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza is becoming a problem, a policy problem for the administration and a political problem. At the same time, the president has aspirations to try to turn this crisis, which is unlike any other that I've ever confronted or participated in my 25 years of working for a half dozen secretaries of state of both political parties on this issue. The administration has an ambitious plan, an ambitious day after plan to wrap all of this in a sort of comprehensive regional integrated package whose centerpiece would be an Israeli-Saudi normalization agreement in exchange for commitments on the part of the Israelis. And I must admit, the language that that Secretary Blinken has been using is quite revealing. He talks about steps that would be time-bound and irreversible on the way to a Palestinian state. I think that, frankly, given the politics in Israel, is going to be an extremely difficult lift, either with this government, and when I say this government, I mean a government in which you have two extremist ministers who exercise significant influence, and the war cabinet. I think progress toward a Palestinian state in the near term, even with a new government, that would at best be a more pragmatic center-right government, is going to be extremely difficult. So you have a situation, one last point, which has now expanded. I don't believe that we're on the cusp of a regional war. A regional war would involve a major confrontation between Israel and Hezbollah, in which Hezbollah would use its high trajectory weapons, which cover most of Israel. The Israelis would preempt or counter with a massive ground, sea, and air campaign, which would cause, if the summer of 2006, the last Israel-Hezbollah war is any indication, in which 1,200 Lebanese were killed and 160 Israeli soldiers, we're talking about a confrontation that would probably involve thousands of Lebanese dead and hundreds of Israelis, and could, by the time it was over, lead to direct American strikes against Iran and Iran's retaliation with ballistic missiles against Israel, its American assets, and the Gulf. That's a regional war. We're not there yet, and I'm not predicting that we're there, but I am worried that both the headlines and the trend lines of this situation, to me, if de-escalation is in fact the theme of these presentations, I think we're very far away from that fact right now.
Thank you, Aaron. That was very comprehensive as a scene setter. I myself have a couple of questions, but I would like to bring maybe straight in Maya, because you mentioned about the U.S. administration, regional plan that in the end will include many steps, including the creation of a Palestinian state. How does the current Israeli administration think about this, and what could potentially happen in the future? Please, Maya, you have the floor.
Hi, and thank you for having me. So I think it's quite clear that Netanyahu is rejecting a two-state solution. He said that very clearly. In English, he says it's something a bit more moderate, but the bottom line is that this government is, as Aaron said, is unable to speak about a political solution that includes a Palestinian state. It is also unable to speak about who will rule Gaza, the Gaza Strip, or at least it is not willing to have the revitalized Palestinian Authority, as Blinken and Biden call it, ruling the Gaza Strip. So there's a big question there. Gallant, the Ministry of Defense, with the IDF, has proposed some sort of a plan in which local people would, I would say, people from who have sort of strongholds of strength, but not coming from Hamas, would be the rulers in the Gaza Strip, but nobody has discussed that. And it seems quite unsustainable as an offer even. But I would like to draw a few lines of agreements and disagreement within the government. And here there is an agreement to try and win as much as possible over Hamas from a military perspective. As you know, analysts have said, the destruction of Hamas is probably a quite ambitious goal. In the recent week, Netanyahu has been talking about total victory. What does total victory means? Nobody really knows. But it seems that the government does agree, together with Gantz and Eisenkot, that the military pressure would be a good thing, both for a deal with Hamas over the hostages and perhaps finally to get hold or to kill the Hamas leadership. So the military campaign is still going on, the war is going on, and the IDF has still not tackled the Rafah, the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt. And this is a very sensitive place, both because the Palestinians, most of the Palestinians are now living there. And this is the place, this is the border where the ammunition and weapons is being introduced or was introduced to Hamas in tunnels. So in order to have a demilitarized Gaza Strip, that is something I think that most of the international community is desiring, the Rafah crossing border or the border, the whole region, has to be dealt with. And so the military campaign needs to go on. There is no desire for escalation with Hezbollah in the north. So the going to actually implement the UN Security Council 1707 is a desire also from Israel. We have to see if that actually takes place. Now, when we come to disagreement within the government, as I've mentioned, no talk about the day after. You also don't hear so much from the opposition political parties, anyone speaking about two-state solution. This is something that for Israelis is extremely hard to speak about. In Mitvim, we do speak about the solutions for the day after. We have a whole program and a plan, but it will be very hard for the Israelis to swallow. I still think that it is necessary for the international community to speak about the two-state solution and to confront whatever Israeli leadership is there, that this is what the international community expects of Israel, and this should be the political solution that would be reached. I'll say also that there is now, we are coming very close to the issue of the deal regarding the hostages. We know that a lot of the hostages are already dead by now, at least 50. So that leaves 80 hostages alive. And this is something that is very much at the top of priorities of many Israelis. So there is a lot of tension inside the government about the issue of the deal. I would also say that just to touch upon maybe a few issues that has to do with the European Union and how we see the European Union. But beforehand, let me also stress the UNRWA issue. The funding for UNRWA and the mere existence of UNRWA and its aid given in the Gaza Strip. There is a general agreement in the government and also in Israel that UNRWA has to somehow be dismantled in the long run, at least. But for the time being, most of the aid that UNRWA provides for the Gaza Strip goes through Hamas. And therefore, it strengthened Hamas and strengthened the rule of Hamas and its connection to the citizens in the Gaza Strip. And that is something that the international community should take care of. Obviously, all humanitarian aid should be given to the Gazans, but UNRWA and its relationship to Hamas has to be tackled. And for the EU involvement, I would say that the EU doesn't receive a lot of political attention in Israel. We know that Borrell is trying in his last month in his position as High Representative to leave a legacy behind. He has a very interesting peace conference plan being offered. Nobody has spoken about it in Israel. It's really off topic. And we see, I think, the EU in its disunity and its very slow pace of reacting to things, but maybe we can elaborate that afterwards.
Thank you, Maya, for also giving us the perspective from inside the Israeli government, but also for bringing the EU into discussion, which makes very easy the connection to Andrea. Maybe, Andrea, you can tell us a little bit about the role of the EU and maybe perhaps how the EU could play a bigger role despite the previous track record. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mihai, and thank you to the other speakers and to the European Policy Center for the invitation and for setting up this important dialogue. I think the more we speak about it and try to speak about it, the better, given the gravity of the situation since the October 7th attacks. The EU has already been mentioned. There's already been some talk about the EU's interesting peace plan proposal by Joseph Borrell, the External Action Service, the High Representative for European Foreign Policy. Let me, however, before I get to the peace plan, take maybe a few steps back. I do agree with what was said by our previous speakers, by Aaron, with regards to the fact that the local partners or the local fighters, so Israel and Hamas, are in the driving seat, and this is definitely the two actors that are most involved. At the same time, we do also, I think, have to recognize that there are a number of layers of international actors involved in this conflict on either side of the conflict, and therefore there are some levers, I believe, that could be pushed or could be tried to be pushed, both at the regional and, of course, also the international level, and this includes the European Union and the United States. With regards to the EU's reaction, we've heard that the EU is not perhaps the most important player when it comes to Palestine. There's a long-lasting saying that the EU is a payer but not a player when it comes to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and perhaps more broadly also to the Arab-Israeli conflict. I think this saying still holds very much true, and I think, however, perhaps we've even gone beyond it in the sense that the EU is neither a payer nor a player after the October 7th attacks. The first reaction by the European Union has been one of, understandably, one of full support and embrace, both by the European Union itself and by member states, with Israel in terms of the horrible attacks by Hamas on the October 7, understandable and very much needed, this embrace and this solidarity vis-a-vis Israel. And notwithstanding, as well as what's been said, we are talking about an Israeli government which is the most right-wing Israeli government in history, and with which the European Union and member states have had a very difficult relationship recently. I think another reason or another important element when we speak of the European Union's embrace and solidarity vis-a-vis Israel, which I entirely do embrace, is that a very high number of European citizens are also killed in the attack of October 7. And this is something that is sometimes missed, perhaps, in the general rhetoric or the general analysis of what has happened. However, I think that the first initial, after this embrace, after this first initial solidarity with Israel, the European Union encountered significant difficulties, internal difficulties and divisions, and even, I would say, some turf wars between various institutions within the European Union. The messaging that was put out on the one side by the European Commission, on the other side by the External Action Service, was very contradictory and really exposed the depth of the divide within European member states and also European institutions vis-a-vis Israel, vis-a-vis Palestine, and vis-a-vis the broader southern neighborhood. This, therefore, has again exposed the deep divisions and, I would say, even the lack of a united foreign policy by the EU when it comes to the Mediterranean and Middle East. Therefore, the unity of intent that was so important and so, I think, also beneficial for the EU vis-a-vis Ukraine was quickly swept away, quickly swept under the carpet, and this is something that is definitely of significance for the European Union's role as a global actor. The embrace with Israel continues till this day, I would say, to the extent that many of the objectives of Israel, the stated objectives of the Israeli government vis-a-vis its military operations in Gaza, were almost taken on board by a number of member states. In this sense, therefore, there is a continuation of the tendency of the EU and key member states to probably follow the USA line with regards to the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Therefore, this idea of trying to dismantle Hamas via military means was taken on board by a number of very important actors. I would say that there were even a few steps further in the sense of buying into this rhetoric, initially at least, of Hamas equaling ISIS, which is a very problematic and very short-sighted framing of the issue, to the extent that we had the French President Macron even traveling to Israel and proposing the use of the anti-ISIS coalition to fight Hamas. These are indications of the extent to which the rhetoric and even the viewpoints were embraced almost as European ones themselves. However, more broadly, I think that this policy is changing slowly. We are seeing definitely a change of rhetoric. And the reasons for this are, on the one side, because the evidence, because the military problems that Israel is encountering, and also the evidence of clear war crimes that are being committed almost on a daily basis. Now we're entering into the fifth month of the war, are clear for everyone to see. And this has implications for the European Union's credibility, vis-a-vis the so-called rules-based order. The double standards are really present, both with regards to our reaction towards Ukraine, but now to our non-reaction, I would say, vis-a-vis Israel and Palestine. And the global south. The global south has completely moved away from our, let's say, orbit, if we can call orbit. I mean, there have been many diplomats, unnamed, also named, complaining about that we have already lost the global south in great respect because of these clear double standards that are on display with regards to our reaction on the Israeli-Palestinian front. But it not only starts on the 7th of October and after, also there are decades long of a lack of action on the side of European politicians. Let me come therefore to the new proposals. These proposals are being put forth by the Joseph Borrell, by the External Action Service. We should remember that the powers of the External Action Service are very limited when it comes to actually implementing policy. So this 10-point plan for a so-called peace process or a relaunched peace process vis-a-vis Gaza, vis-a-vis Israel, are still on paper. There are non-paper, actually. They are being debated by member states, and there are clear divisions within the member states on how exactly this can come about. We've had a first appointment in terms of the Brussels summit, which was supposed to be a preparatory summit to begin preparing these steps for a plan. This summit did not go very well, in the sense that Israel's foreign minister was invited, and there were serious concerns with regards to the refusal to even discuss a political horizon to resolve this conflict, and this means a two-state framework. Indeed, the video that was shown in this summit was quite problematic with regards to creating an artificial island to move the Palestinian population there. After this, I think we must also reflect on the ruling of the International Court of Justice. This is a very important ruling. It is a ruling that holds extreme importance and weight in terms of international law and credibility of the international legal system. The reactions by a number of member states have been somewhat lukewarm, I would say, again exposing a degree of double standards, which in the long run will be quite problematic. But the 10-point peace plan ultimately rests on what is the minimum common denominator of European policy towards Israel-Palestine, meaning a minimum common denominator which unites all member states. It's been there since the 1990s, and therefore it is this objective, a two-state solution. We can all agree that is needed a two-state solution. We can also agree that perhaps now it is very early and difficult to even think about negotiations towards that. However, more importantly for the European Union level, I think we need to have a clearer discussion of what exactly is meant by a two-state solution. There are various opinions within member states, and none are quite clear on what is meant by a two-state solution. So before we even start thinking of how to get to a two-state solution, I think there is a need to define what we mean as Europeans as a two-state solution. And in this sense, Joseph Borrell's rhetoric again has changed, or is hinting towards this. I think two statements are important in this regard, and I'll close here and we can go into more details probably in the discussion. Twice, Joseph Borrell mentioned that the time has come to impose both a ceasefire on the parties, the warring parties, and that the international community must in some way find a way to impose a ceasefire on the two parties, as hard as this is, of course. But more broadly, there's also a recognition of the need to impose some kind of a solution for this political horizon. This means that a solution needs to be defined in minute detail, with all the difficulties that we, of course, know very well. And this will mean a lot of work, a lot of diplomatic work, mostly within the European internal level, before this is even presented in public. So these are the challenges at hand. Of course, the EU has put in place a number of other actions with regard to the Red Sea, but I find these kind of contingent to the real issue, which is what is happening in Gaza and the need for a solution and a ceasefire as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. You mentioned some very good points, including the lack of credibility of the EU with regards, of course, to the rules-based international order, the double standards issue, as well as the EU influence in the global south. We'll come back to that. I just want to quickly bring Adnan in for a more regional perspective, so that then we can go back to Aaron for some more thoughts on the regional aspects, and then we'll come back to the EU shortly. So Adnan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mihai. Good to be back at EPC, and thanks for all of you joining on the panel. And as those listening to us, I will basically address 3 points. One thing is the key lessons we can already draw from what has been happening in the past 4 months. I then want to speak about how the Gaza crisis and regionalization of it relate to each other, and offer a few thoughts on what is necessary to be done now. Let me start with the key lessons. I think it's something that many have been saying in the past, but it has been increasingly clear that the conflicts in the Middle East, and I think the Middle East is not exceptional there, but conflicts in the Middle East are interconnected. We cannot see one place diving into a deep chaos without other contexts being affected by it. Security affairs somewhere in that region affect security affairs elsewhere. This requires a truly comprehensive approach towards this region, an approach that we simply haven't seen in the past couple of years. And just as an example, there was, of course, rightfully some hope in these Israeli-Arab normalization trends that we saw, the Abraham Accords, but even the discussion around those and those who were leading it lacked any attempt and effort to really comprehensively discuss what it means to have Israeli-Arab normalization and meaningfully also sideline the Palestinian issue. That, of course, had to on one day blow up into our faces. So that is one very, very concrete example of how a lack of a comprehensive approach can really backfire badly. And since this is about de-escalation, any attempt towards de-escalation will also have to be comprehensive. And also any future work on conflict prevention, an area that I and my organization have been working on a lot, the conflict prevention bit, not so much the resolution or management bit of conflict, but conflict prevention requires, and again, a comprehensive approach. And a comprehensive approach means that you simply have to talk to all parties, and you cannot afford not talking to parties you do not like. And we have, unfortunately, particularly in Europe, seen so much public debate and also political debates with lots of virtue signaling and less necessary pragmatism to address and to engage even parties you do not like, because engaging them does not mean legitimizing or recognizing them. But let's have that in mind for a later point I'd like to make. So, and then Aaron already mentioned this risk and danger of regionalization. And I really want to say that this regionalization of the Gaza crisis is not happening overnight, but if we just read out the list of countries that have now been affected by it, it all started with Israel and the Palestinian territories, and then we had Lebanon, we had Syria, then Iraq, Iran, Pakistan, Yemen, Jordan, and the entire Red Sea region. So we are in the midst of it. It's just gradual. It's slowly happening. It's a bit like this famous frog sitting in boiling water that doesn't realize it's getting hot and life-threatening. And the other problem that comes with it is discussing the regionalization all the time, something that Aaron also said one shouldn't do, if I got you right, is that there is also some comfort in doing that because you can lose sight of the actual conflict, and you can somewhat tend to say, in order to prevent regionalization, we need to work with regional partners and then completely ignore what has actually sparked the events that are happening in the region, meaning the actual Gaza crisis, and working with more determination and with more commitment towards a ceasefire. Another problem that I really see in the public debate about this is that, of course, you have a number of non-state and hybrid actors that are now complicating the situation into a considerable extent. And all of them have their alliances with Iran. They are financed, military supported, and what I would always use as a word, have also been cultivated by Iran. But the problem is that this qualifier, Iran-backed, before every entity that is involved in this, has led to ignoring the agency, the national agency, all of these groups have, be it in Iraq, be it in Syria, Yemen, or in Palestinian territory. And this is very helpful to political agendas that, of course, would rather like to problematize Iran for good reason to some extent, while ignoring what is actually happening in the Israel-Hamas war. So again, we need a more comprehensive approach that takes into account what is driving those Iraqi groups, what is driving the Ansar Allah in Yemen, to also understand that deterrence, as it is practiced by the US military, works vis-a-vis a state, but that does not necessarily work vis-a-vis a group like Ansar Allah. So here I really think, and I would like to echo what has already been said, when ignoring these nuances in the debate, when ignoring the depth of the complication, it comes with a catastrophic reputational cost. And that reputational cost will have its mid and long-term consequences that really, particularly Europe, but that has already been said, so I won't elaborate on that further. But that's a real point of concern to me as a citizen of Europe in European relations with the region. Now, a few words on how to go forward. I think I'd like to reiterate the point: when we want to speak about de-escalation, we simply cannot afford not to talk to every party. This also includes that this idea of defining an actor or a state as part of the problem and therefore no longer eligible of being an addressee to talk to, this I would challenge big time by just saying, by definition, the one state or the one actor that is part of a problem is necessarily also the part of the solution if you find a way to engage this actor or the state. So there needs to be, in my view, a willingness to go where it's really hard to go, to talk to people you really dislike, because this is about political decisions, this is about war and peace. From the consultations we in our organization had with regional countries, I think it is quite clear that if there is a proper approach, there can be a division of labor between Middle Eastern, between regional countries. There are things that the Saudi Arabia, the UAE can do. There are things Qatar is already doing. There are things Iran can do. There are things Turkey and Egypt can do, as we have already seen, but also Jordan, of course. And the discussion should not be about these countries taking on Palestinian refugees, but rather what can they do in order to facilitate a peace process that is so desperately needed. For Europe, this means, and this is my last point, that any future discussion will require much more wisdom and courage. Courage to say things that are unpopular, courage to say things that may blow up in your face in a headline in the yellow press, but that courage is needed if there is really a commitment towards a peacemaking effort from Europe. Let me send it back to you, Mihai.
Thank you, Adnan. I'm mindful, Aaron, that you also need to leave soon. So I want to come back to you to see if you have any reaction to Adnan's perspective, specifically on the regional groups supported by Iran. And here I'll maybe throw another question as well, which is about the US response. Is it how efficient do you think it is, and what could come next?
Yeah, let me just make an overall comment. Very smart people on this panel. I particularly enjoyed Adnan's comments. You know, I look at the Middle East as a place by and large where American ideas on war making and peacemaking go to die. That's partly a responsibility of the United States, but I think it also merits an honest and sober look at the region with which we're dealing. Any comprehensive approach for regional stability, security, and prosperity, I think, frankly, is an idea tethered to an illusion. You have 5 Arab states in active phases of dysfunction, if not meltdown. Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Lebanon. You have an Iran acting directly through its proxies that seeks regional influence and is months away from the production of enough fissile material to make a nuclear weapon. And you've got any number of other problems in the region: bad governance, lack of respect for human rights, absence of gender equality, lack of transparency in governance, empty spaces that have no governance, and extractive leaders, frankly, in many of these countries that care more about maintaining their own political power than having the best interests of their peoples at heart. So the notion somehow that you can move from management to resolution strikes me as a very, very hard lift. And I think that that the last 20 years, not that the United States has accelerated and furthered these negative trends, I think to a large extent our policy has, but I think it's extremely difficult to envision comprehensive solutions to a region that remains in many respects unlike any other region in the world. Fewer democracies, more non-state actors committed to doing bad deeds, a detachment from the global economy in many respects, and a debate ongoing within Arab societies between the haves and the have-nots, and the cans and the cannots, those who can participate in the governance of their societies and those who cannot. So, I mean, my own take on this is quite modest and not transformational at all. I'm not sure there is a single problem in this region, not a one, that I could identify for any of you that has what I would describe to you as a comprehensive or a definitive solution. What to do about Syria? What to do about the Israeli-Palestinian problem? How do you deal with a putative nuclear weapon state like Iran? How do you deal with the dysfunction in Lebanon? So I come at this with a set of modest sort of recommendations to how to deal with this. As far as the United States is concerned, you have an administration that is in the process of, or a president who is seeking re-election in what may prove to be one of the most consequential elections in modern American history. His tendency here is going to be risk averse, not risk ready. You have dysfunctional politics. You have an emergency supplemental stalled in Congress, which is now tethered to discussions on our own border, which could prove decisive to supporting Ukraine, which 2 years on, I was told was the fulcrum of Western civilization against an ambitious and aggressive Vladimir Putin. And yet Ukraine seems to have kind of vanished, frankly, from the headlines as Israel-Gaza has taken up all the oxygen in the room. Specifically, in answer to your question, I don't think that the United States has any illusions whatsoever that the airstrikes that it's carried out and the strikes against a group like KH is going to have anything more than a temporary deterrent impact. I think the United States is responding to its own reality in politics that you cannot kill Americans with impunity, and the US is going to have to figure out a way to respond. I don't think there is any illusion in the Biden administration that these responses are going to somehow deal with any of the underlying problems that exist. And nor do I believe that these non-state actors will in any way be sort of domesticated as a consequence of our actions. So again, I think we should be extremely realistic about what can be achieved and what to expect from the United States in this regard.
Thank you, Aaron. You certainly gave us more food for thought on the reactions of the US and the Western community. I still that you're with us for another 2 or 3 minutes,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I realize I've said a lot, and forgive me for droning on, but it just seems to me, I wonder whether we're all looking at the same region. That's my concern.
Are there any maybe reactions from the other speakers to this? I see Maya wants to come in. I think Adnan as well, and I see also you, Andrea. But maybe before that, I'll just quickly squeeze in for 1 minute another question to you, Aaron, before you leave, which is regarding the day after in Gaza. How could day after scenario look like? In, I don't know, the best case scenario in your opinion?
Yeah, imagine Gaza as a microcosm of the broader problems that I'm discussing. Right now, I think we need to retire the whole concept of the day after, as if there'll be some bright line between the end of Israeli military operations and some period of prolonged stability. Let's deal with the three realities we face. And I don't think anybody, has a solution to any of them. Number one, Hamas is going to survive. It will continue either through co-optation, intimidation, to influence the politics of Gaza. It will not disappear as an organization, and it may even retain some residual military capacity. Number two, Israel will be operating in Gaza at some level for months to come. Doesn't mean heavy use of artillery and airstrikes and division-sized operations. But the Israelis are in the process now of constructing an informal 36-mile buffer zone between the Gaza envelope communities and Gaza. And whatever agreement the Israelis reach, if there is one, they are not going to abandon their effort to identify and kill the top senior leadership. And number three, where is the security regime, the turnkey government, the government in a box that's going to come into Gaza to maintain security control and order, let alone where are the legitimizing agents for Palestinian governance of Gaza? Mahmoud Abbas is 88. He's in the 19th year of a 4-year term. The PA is corrupt, autocratic, and feckless. It has no credibility among Palestinians in the West Bank. If you believe Khalil Shakaki's polls, Hamas's support has surged. The Israeli government is embarked on a policy toward the West Bank, which is annexationist in anything but name, and is daily undermining Abbas's authority and legitimacy. So I have identified 3 issues. How do you deal with Hamas post-conflict? What do you say about the Israelis continuing to operate in Gaza in months to come? And what do you do about the problem of Palestinian governance? There is no multinational organization that is going to agree to put boots on the ground. The Arab states seem to be reluctant, would be an understatement. They are not going to engage in security and repression of what could be a Hamas insurgency. So forget the region. Forget coming up with comprehensive solutions to solve all the problems that our speakers have brilliantly identified. Just think about how to figure out what to do about Gaza. And frankly, I don't think there's anybody in the administration that has answers to any of the three issues that I've raised. Again, I'm very sorry to sort of drop all this on you, but I mean, reality compels me, to counter the notion that somehow this is an inflection point, and it is, that will merit and warrant a massive international, well-organized response from the so-called international community to fix everything that ails the Middle East. I think it's fantastical.
Well, thank you, Aaron, for all your insights. I understand you need to drop off now. You gave us
I apologize in advance. I really do.
No, you gave us a bleak perspective, but I'm sure we'll keep discussing for the next half an hour, and hopefully.
All right. Thanks for having me, and thanks to the wonderful panelists on the program.
Thank you so much.
And we'll talk again, I'm sure.
For sure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Now, I'd like to go back to you. I mean, Aaron gave us a lot of food for thought, also regionally, but also on Gaza. So I'll let you to pick up where you'd like. Maybe Maya, you can go first, then we can go to Adnan, and then we can go to you, Andrea. And then there are already some questions in the Q&A box, and we can address those afterwards. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, I do have a lot of points to address. But first, it's really important for me, Andrea, to correct one error that has gone in social media with regards to the Foreign Affairs Council in Brussels 2 weeks ago, when Foreign Minister Katz participated, and he indeed showed 2 videos, but the island he showed is a plan that he had as a Minister of Transportation from 2017. It does not the purpose is not to reallocate Gazans to there. It's not for population purposes. It's for infrastructure. And actually, it's for desalination project, for cement, for energy, solar projects and stuff like that, because the Gaza Strip is so condensed and small. And actually, I have to say that the peace organizations in Israel are looking at this plan as a very positive one. So obviously, it had nothing to do with the agenda that Borrell and the other foreign ministers wanted to address, but let's just put things in perspective. And then I think there are a few issues that we maybe didn't emphasize enough, and this is the Iranian connection in the region. And the necessary to deal with all those branches and proxies of Iran. And this is the biggest destabilizer power in the region. But we also see how the Israeli-Hamas war has caused this destabilization in the region. So it was probably almost two decades ago when EU poll of who is the most dangerous conflict, what is the most dangerous conflict, and Israel-Palestinian one was on the first before Iran, which was very, I think, surprising for Israelis to find out. And I think, again, as an Israeli, I think also regionally we see how destabilizing Iran can be and how nuclear Iran would be a very major threat in the region. So this is one thing. To address the questions that Aaron put, and they're very heavy questions, I think Europe, the United States, and the Arab pragmatic countries would like to see Hamas go away to the extent it's possible, okay? Obviously, it will not be completely eliminated, but in the military sense, Israel and the IDF have a mission to perform, which will be for the benefit of the region. I have to say that when it comes, and that is one brick in this order of solving all the conflicts, all the puzzles that Aaron has put here. So Israel is indeed going to stay in the Gaza Strip for the next few months, maybe even more, especially when we don't have an international force to take over, which is indeed a shame, but that also depends on to what extent the IDF is able to eliminate Hamas. That would enhance a possibility of some international force to come in, but it's not discussed right now. It's not on the table. We don't see it. What with the Palestinian Authority, we actually have seen a couple of weeks ago, the Palestinian Authority has published some sort of reforms, a plan of reforms. It's probably not enough, but they are on the way to establish some of the reforms. And it was not very clear to begin with, what did the Biden administration mean when it said revitalized Palestinian Authority? But it is a process being proceeded. So that's one slight, maybe light of optimism. Obviously, there will need to be a different Israeli government for anything to take place, for any political solution to take place. And we still don't see the end of this government. It's not a linear process. It could come, out of this quite suddenly when we have very fragile a government with the issue of the hostages release and other very touchy issues on the table. So we're not sure. But I think the main issue indeed, and Aaron and other speakers have touched it at the beginning of our panel, is the very short time constraint that we have with the elections coming in the United States. And this is, as I completely agree with Aaron, this is the most crucial elections we probably see with the implications on the world between Biden and Trump. And we see it already with regards to Ukraine yesterday in the Senate, in the United States Senate. So I do see that if there will be another term for Biden and his administration, there is a possibility to try very slowly to tackle all those huge challenges on the Middle East agenda. And it is necessary in order to build a coalition, a stable coalition. It will not be a democratic one. It will not respect human rights. It will not respect women's rights. And those Arab regimes around Israel will not do that. But there is an opportunity with normalization with Saudi Arabia, obviously with some sort of a prospect of a two-state solution, to have a much more stable Middle East, much more stability, peace, and also prosperity with the economic corridor that was perceived by Biden at the G20 summit in September. To have those trains coming over from India to the Gulf, through Jordan and Israel to Europe. So this is actually, I think, the big carrot that could convince a different Israeli leadership to conceive or to at least think about a Palestinian, some sort of a demilitarized Palestinian state in the long future. You are muted,
yes,
Mihai.
yes. Even after so long, I still forget sometimes to unmute myself. Thank you, Maya. Now, maybe I'll move to you, Adnan. There's also a question that maybe you are able to take from the audience. But first, speaking of comprehensive approach, this got me thinking a little bit to these EU regional programs in the southern neighborhood that basically bring together all sorts of actors that normally in other circumstances are all at odds with each other. Do you see this maybe helping in finding this comprehensive approach that you mentioned? That would be my point. And then we have a question from the audience. I'm just going to read it out loud from Andre de Munter. I said that, Adnan, you mentioned Turkey. Is there still any future mediation role for Turkey, given its very explicit statements about Israel and its refusal to call Hamas a terrorist organization? What about the guarantor mechanism, formula that the Turkish MFA Minister of Foreign Affairs Hakan Fidan already proposed on several occasions? I'm not sure if that's something that you can also take, but I put it out there, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. Look, I think on the one hand, there are very, very promising and positive things in terms of the EU's approach towards the region. I think it was very good news when we saw that there is an EU strategy towards the Gulf region, but then it was a bit half-hearted because like 90% of the document speaks about the GCC, but there are also references to Iran, to Iraq, a bit to Yemen. And there is this EU special representative for the Gulf region as well. But in practice, there are a lot of limits to such positions, because obviously there is, for the EU, the one thing that must not be torpedoed is any remaining effort to save the JCPOA. So Iran cannot be put as a file in the hands of just one special envoy. And this brings a bit of operational complications, because when the special representative travels to the GCC countries and then also visits Iran, he also at all times has to make sure that he has no mandate to speak about JCPOA related issues, the nuclear file. But again, at least there is this attempt to sort of have an outreach. There is a strategy of the EU with Iraq, and a clear path also related to Yemen. And this requires, and I'm not saying that this is not happening, but the EU apparatus is huge. It requires a lot of coordination between these different positions on Iraq, on Yemen, on Iran, and on the GCC. So that makes comprehensive approaches possible, but requires a lot of administrative coordination. And I lack the trust of that happening, but that's quite natural. I would like to point out, just as a quick response to Aaron, of course, the Middle East is one utterly complicated place, but at the same time, it needs to be obviously reduced to sub-regions. We have to look at the Levant, we have to look at the Gulf region, we have to look at West Asia, if you will. It needs to be sort of looked into sub-regions. And of course, the Gaza crisis has now turned Israel and the Palestinian territories into one field that needs all of the attention. But at all times, the other layers, the countries around Israel and the Palestinian territories, the Levant, will have to be taken into consideration. And then, of course, the power play from other countries. So there needs to be something that really scales up and down the zooming into a region. You have to zoom in and out constantly, and you cannot afford not to do so. That was actually the main point. And I don't see I'm not as negative as Aaron when it comes to the lack of capability or capacities in these regions to also solve something. Let me just quickly answer in a non-satisfactory manner the question by Andrea with regards to Turkey. Look, the prime minister or the president refusing to call Hamas a terrorist organization brings him in the position to be able to talk to Hamas. That's again the thing. You can call them a terrorist organization. At that moment, you're no longer eligible, or you're no longer a good interlocutor to talk to them. So I think we can dislike Turkey's government or President Erdogan for a zillion things, but there might be one useful thing that could be done. I'm not a Turkey expert, so I'm not going to go any further than that. And it's the same with Iran. I think with Iran, it's clear there are ties to parts of the Hamas leadership, not to all of it. And there has been some background work that Iran was also doing when it came to the deal on releasing the hostages. But that's just a tiny bit of the big puzzle. So at the end, there will not be one single country or one single political figure that can embody a big approach towards cessation of hostilities, but maybe a division of labor, as I hinted to earlier.
Thank you, Adnan. Now moving to you, Andrea, and of course I'll give you the chance to react on what Aaron has said earlier and the other speakers, but maybe let me go back to something that you mentioned about the EU moving away from the global south. You said something on this line: after current developments, the EU has moved away from the orbit of global south. How can the EU come back closer to the global south? Are there any any solutions to this? Any measures that you think the EU could take to reestablish, the connections?
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I didn't mean that the EU is moving away from the global south, or that the global south was ever necessarily in the EU's orbit. What I meant is that the clear double standards, the clear lack of credibility, an enormous gap between rhetoric, statements, and action are pushing the global south away from the European Union and the West more broadly, I would say. This is, I think, the key global macro trend that we can kind of extract from what is happening for the past 4+ months, but also beforehand, in the sense that there was an enormous effort by the European Union after the Russian invasion of Ukraine to rightly so, try and convince the global south of the validity of the importance of its policy in support of Ukraine. And there were also some gains done on these dossiers. Since the attack, the Hamas's horrible attack on the 7th of October, and all that has happened since, these value-oriented policies or efforts are much weaker and are not working any longer. Indeed, there are a number of European diplomats quoted in various media outlets saying that our rule-based order is become a joke in much of the global south, and that our credibility has touched rock bottom, and that the next time we as Europeans try to argue that we are doing a policy based on international law and humanitarian international law or human rights, it will be much harder to get our points across and to convince other interlocutors. And the greater macro trend of this is that the world is changing very quickly, and that no longer the United States and the European Union will no longer be the big poles, let's say, in the international system. And this a bit brings me also to kind of respond to some of the points made. I must say that I do agree with Adnan, with much of what Adnan said, in the sense that in this world that is changing, we can no longer think that we can simply speak with our friends and ignore our enemies, or try and defeat our enemies via military means or sanctions or drawing lines. There needs to be a sense of inclusivity, a sense of shared future for the region, which must be based on what the region actually is, and not what perhaps certain centers of power in the West would like the region to be. The idea of rolling back Iranian influence across much of the Middle East and certain areas is just as perhaps utopian as maybe what Aaron was saying, in terms of trying to transform the Arab-Israeli conflict and have a peace, an independent Palestinian state. We need to start on the basis of realism. We need to start on the basis also that while much of the world or much of the region has changed after October 7, many things have not changed. And the biggest thing that has not changed is that the big absent in all of this, and to an extent we are beating around the bush perhaps, the big absence is the absence of a Palestinian state, which would create reverberations, positive reverberations across the region, and would also help in deflating the attractiveness of other models, of other poles, including the Iranian pole, which of course has various complications and various issues which are completely counter to Western and Israeli and other interests in the region. The point is how we are going to deal with this. And I think that the heart of the issue is the lack of focus, the lack of diplomatic emphasis on the need to find a solution to the Palestinian right to self-determination. And Hamas has not emerged out of the blue on October the 7th. There have been negotiations with Hamas in the past. There are negotiations still today with Hamas in the past. And I do agree with what Aaron said, that whether we like it or not, most probably there will be a Hamas after the so-called ceasefire is signed, and after the so-called day after, let's say. I would like to also say 2 points which I think are extremely important with regards to, first of all, the idea that we can envision a furthering of the military operations into the Rafah region, in the Rafah city. This, I must say, with the uttermost strength and worry that any military operation that enters into Rafah will be a devastation, the extent of which we have not even seen the beginning of for the past 4 months. This would really bury any possibility of hoping to find a diplomatic solution to the Palestinian issue in the next generation. And I do not think that it is in anyone's interest, especially the Israeli citizenry and the Israeli government, to envision such a situation. So I believe that the first most important issue is to avoid this, create a pause, a diplomatic opening that on which afterwards there is a possibility, a slim possibility, of course, to build the diplomatic steps. And this can only happen from a serious concerted pressure from outside, I fear, because I do agree that the Israeli government and also Hamas have no interest in ending the conflict in a way that is acceptable to the other side. And therefore, there really needs to be a change of pace if the international, so-called international community is serious in avoiding what can really become an even worse situation for everyone involved. The final point on UNRWA, I am afraid that I cannot agree with what was said from my colleague in Israel. I do understand, like any organization, UNRWA has problems. There are members that have worked or work with UNRWA which have some affiliation with Hamas or sympathies with Hamas. The proof that has been given up till now with regards to what happened on October 7th is very, very, very light, and I have direct kind of references that can be made. And the idea that a number of European countries who have unilaterally cut funding to UNRWA, specifically in the moment when famine and disease is spreading in Gaza, I think is the uttermost example of these double standards and the way that we are losing 3/4 of the global south and 3/4 of the world, this means. So really, I think we need to think deeply. UNRWA is not only active in Gaza, it's active across other countries. There are problems with UNRWA. It is a United Nations organization, however, which has a mandate, which is not to transform or create a Palestinian state, but to provide life-saving help and aid to the Palestinian refugees and the Palestinian population. And defunding it in this moment, even if there is proof of 12 members having in some way been involved with the horrendous attacks of the 7th October, is really a step, I think, or a couple of steps too far, leading into direct complicity and direct violation also of what the preliminary rulings of the International Court of Justice has asked very clearly in terms of increasing aid to the Palestinian population in Gaza. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea, specifically for coming back on these last 2 points on the UNRWA, but also on the creation of the Palestinian state. But staying at the issue of the Palestinian state, there is a question in from the audience that I would like maybe all of you to address. Of course, feel free also to refer to previous points, and I will just it's a very long question, but I'll try to paraphrase. I think we all know the whole issues that the creation of Palestinian state is facing. I think considering all these challenges, can you imagine an alternative to a Palestinian state, or do you believe that the Palestinian state is the right path for the Palestinians and the region? And maybe I'll give you a chance first, Maya, to react to also some of the previous points, and then we'll go back to Andrea, and then we'll end with you, Adnan. Please go ahead, Maya.
Okay, so first I'd like to address the issue of the global south and hear how to fix the relations. I think I have one proposition that the EU has actually managed to do quite well, but the global south didn't. And this is the separation between Hamas and the rest of the Palestinians, or Palestinians who are not identifying themselves with the cause of Hamas, which is annihilation of the state of Israel. So since Hamas is actually hiding under all the hospitals in the Gaza Strip and hiding behind civilians, it is extreme challenge to tackle that militarily. And I think the European Union, or especially South Africa, if you look at them, and their appeal to the ICJ, I think there's a moral failure of South Africa not to address Hamas and the atrocities of Hamas. And there's a separation that needs to be done, and my heart goes to the Palestinian victims there, but responsibility needs to be laid also on Hamas, hiding behind all those hospitals, all those educational or UNRWA centers, or all the others, UN agencies or other agencies there. And that has to be tackled, and that has to be addressed vis-a-vis the global South in a way that also the global South has to, look into its conscience and address itself. So separation between Palestinians and Hamas is one thing. And the other thing is recognizing a Palestinian state. And this is something that we actually heard from Foreign Minister Cameron in the United Kingdom and by Blinken in the United States. I know that several European countries wish also to, at least, they're investigating or they're learning how to do that properly. And recognizing a Palestinian state is a symbolic act. There are still 19 EU countries that haven't recognized a Palestinian state. France, Germany, and Italy are among them. And this is one way to put a very strong signal to Israel and also to the Palestinians, a hope, for a Palestinian state for them. So this is another thing I think that the EU should do in order to address its problem with the global South, but also to explain itself better. I think the EU has actually done quite, it's very slow, it's very not unified when it comes to the whole issue of this political solution, but it has managed to, or it will manage on the 19th of February to decide on this defensive operations against the Houthis. So this is something that the EU is actually taking actions on, and that is, I think, to the benefit of the EU, and enlarging the terrorist list of Hamas-involved persons, including Yahya Sinwar, Mohammed Def, and other persons on that list, and all the other organizations who are actually funding Hamas. Some of them are in Turkey. Others are in other European places. So actually Europe has shown its financial strength to tackle some of the issues of Hamas as a terror organization that is actually living on its financial reserves. So I think Europe, again, and the United States and the international community in that sense has a desire that Hamas is a very much extreme religious Islamic movement would not play a role in the region, as I think Europe has an interest had an interest versus ISIS. Okay, so there is an interest to actually tackle Hamas to the best of the abilities, be it financially and militarily. And I would not go into the Rafah crossing. I think that's part of the issue. So how to deal with that without harming the Palestinians, it's a big challenge. I completely agree with you, Andrea, but sometimes, the things have to be done. Is a Palestinian, I want to address the issue of Palestinian state, and is it sustainable? I believe it is, and I believe that the Palestinian Authority has been able to address the needs of the Palestinian citizens at the beginning of the 90s, and the beginning of the 2000s, and less so in the past decade. Some of it because of Israeli constraints that have been put on the Palestinians and other, operations of the IDF that were definitely not to the benefit of the Palestinian Authority. I think that if there will be a revitalized Palestinian Authority with much less corruptions, with much more legitimacy in the sense that it will really take care of the interest of the Palestinians, of their welfare, of their health, of their education, etc. And there could be an economic plan for the region, and this is something that the EU has addressed, and we haven't addressed it. And that the whole economic sort of package, stimulating package for the region that will be given with Gulf countries and with the United States to the region if Israel will go forward with recognizing a Palestinian state, normalizing relations with Saudi Arabia. I think there could be some sort of peace and prosperity and stability to the region that would be to the benefit of all economies in this axis between the Gulf, Israel, Jordan, Palestinians, maybe Egypt as well. And so I think it can be sustainable, but only through some sort of regional economic, not integration, but cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you, Maya, for bringing also some optimism to the discussion. I know we are sort of out of time, but I'll just ask you to bear with me for a few more moments to also give a chance to Andrea and Adnan to say a couple of thoughts. I mean, a couple of minutes. Please go ahead, Andrea.
Thank you so much. I will try to be very, very quick. I mean, I have points on all of the elements. Quickly on the Global South and their success, or the West's success in separating Hamas from Palestine, to an extent, in the sense that if you ask many younger generations in many European countries who have been stopped from protesting in solidarity for the Palestinian population and the Palestinian cause as well, there has been an increasing kind of branding of any protest for a ceasefire as a protest in solidarity for Hamas. And this is not, I think, conducive to supporting the inclusivity and the diversity, which has been such an important element, and which is something that we as Europeans care very deeply about in terms of looking towards the future. The South African court case, the 85-page document, does put a lot of emphasis as well, perhaps not as much as on the other claims, condemning what Hamas was done in the 7th of October, and also requesting for an immediate release of the hostages, which itself is a violation of international law and, of course, a clear war crime as well. With regards to the recognition of the Palestinian state, yes, I did not mention this, but it is on the plate. It is a possibility. It is a symbolic, however, move, which will have very little real effect on the ground, although I would be entirely, I would embrace entirely this move within the context of a broader set of tools that can hopefully have also an impact on the ground. The terror list of Sinwar, absolutely, very good move, very important move to clearly define a number of actors linked to the leadership of Hamas as terrorist members, and the need for sanctions as well. Unfortunately, there has been a promise to sanction also violent settlers who have been carrying out numerous attacks in the West Bank, an area which again is beyond the Gaza crisis, but where we are seeing some of the same policies, punitive policies, collective punishment of the Palestinians, and therefore undermining the Palestinian Authority and the idea of a possible Palestinian state. This proposal to sanction settlers has been blocked because two countries in Europe, the Czech Republic and Hungary, have put a veto. And therefore, if the European Union wants to really become a payer and a player on the conflict, we also need to address the element of unanimity in making decisions. Finally, on the sweeteners, let's say the carrots versus sticks. I mean, again, we are going, I fear, around in circles. We have, as European Union, proposed an enormous package of sweeteners a very long time ago to Israeli governments. These sweeteners have always been ignored by successive Israeli governments because they go to the heart of the issue, which is an availability or a political will to actually do what is necessary to allow for the emergence of a Palestinian state. And this brings me kind of full circle in the sense that since 2002, there has been an Arab peace proposal, an Arab peace plan, which does exactly this, promises normalization, promises integration, promises prosperity for the entire region in exchange of a recognition of a Palestinian state. And I fear that, again, without international pressure, and I mean, therefore, no longer carrots, but also sticks, and this means sanctions also on Israel, not only on the Palestinians, who has been usually used as sanctions. I'm afraid that this horizon, this outcome cannot come. And this does not mean that Europe should not be important, that Israeli security should not be very, very important for Europe, and it is. And I am the first to have enormous amount of attachment to Israeli society, Israel as a state, and this is what is motivating actually me in trying to be so passionate about this issue, because I care deeply about the future of the region, the future of Israel, and the future of the European Union's ability to take part in creating this better future for all of us involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrea. And now to you, Adnan, and also thank you very much for answering a couple of questions in the Q&A box. It's much appreciated. Please, any last thoughts from you, Adnan?
Yeah, I'm afraid I cannot tackle Maximilian's question. That's above my pay grade to talk about Russia. And I think Maya and Andrea have said a lot of relevant things with regards to the topic of our discussion. The one thing that I would just close with is, in all of these contexts, we have seen more reasonable voices and actors in the past. And there are, be it in Israel, be it on the Palestinian side, be it in Iran, be it in Saudi or wherever, still those reasonable voices, but they're just sidelined by more radical elements who have the necessary zeal to push through their agenda. And I think here we really have to, it's not far from what we're seeing in Europe. The reasonable, sane people do not invest as much zeal into pushing their agenda through than those on the other side, the radical ones. That has reasons, but I really believe that one should, only because the Palestinian state is very difficult, if not impossible, to envision right now, only because the Netanyahu government has created a reality that is that looks impossible to be rolled back, only because on the Hamas side there isn't any prospect of making reasonable solutions. That all doesn't mean that there aren't still those voices that would want to make this work. And here I would also, should we have media people in the audience, I think really the media, particularly in Europe, because we have all the liberty and freedoms it requires, can do a much better job to not fall for sensationalists and big quotes that are clickbaits, but to really try and listen to the reasonable voices on all sides. And that can also help us to envision a better future and not be bitter and utterly pessimistic. Having rain outside, which I have right now, is enough pressure. We don't also have to be pessimistic about the future. Back to you, Mihai, and thank you for your extended patience.
Thank you, Adnan, for this plea, and to all of you for all the great insights. I think there are many aspects that we all agree, and also several aspects that we don't exactly agree on. But my main take, I think, from the discussion is really the importance of dialogue and discussions between parties that not necessarily like each other, like you put it, Adnan. I think also Andrea and Maya hinted to this as well, and also Aaron earlier. And with this, I would like to thank you for taking part into the discussion. I would like to thank our audience for being with us and bearing with us for another 10 minutes beyond the allocated time. And I'm looking forward to continue these discussions in future EPC events. Thank you very much, and have a nice afternoon or evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.